Russia is winning on the battlefield and will continue to do so. So Trump wants to get out of this. Zelensky and his group rule again as dictators, and so they don't respond to the obvious need to negotiate.
My first question to you is, in fact, let's just start by talking about what you said will happen and did happen. Putin flew to Alaska. Maybe the first thought in his head upon touching down in Alaska was, why did Russia sell this massive piece of land, which became a non-contiguous US state, for a paltry sum of a few $1 million? And perhaps that had Russia not sold it to US, it would have been easier to explain Russia's objections to what the collective West tried to do in Ukraine. Now, without going into details of what transpired, as it has been discussed threadbare since then, where do you think things will go from here?
I think the United States is pulling back from a war that the U.S. started. The U.S. started this war with NATO expansion and then with overthrowing the Ukrainian government in 2014 in February of that year. I should say participating actively in the overthrow of that government. So the war started 11 years ago. It's gone pretty badly for the Ukrainians, terribly, I would say. Not well for the United States. Russia is winning on the battlefield and will continue to do so. So Trump wants to get out of this. On the other hand, the propaganda in the United States and Europe is so warmongering all the time that Trump, not being a very strong person or very bright person, doesn't quite know how to maneuver in this politics. So he takes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But the basic idea is the U.S. is pulling out of an active engagement in the war. Russia is continuing to defeat Ukraine on the ground. The Ukrainian government is a martial law dictatorship, by the way, so it doesn't respond to the overwhelming call by the Ukrainian people for a negotiated end of the war. Russia has launched another massive missile and drone strike against Kiev and other cities of Ukraine. This is doing terrible things to Ukraine, but the Ukrainians' government, Zelensky and his group, rule again as dictators, and so they don't respond to the obvious need to negotiate. All of this means, as a bottom line, there's a lot of confusion. Trump is unfortunately a weak president, and so he doesn't know how to close the deal. But what it does mean is that the active phase of the U.S. war against Russia is basically coming to an end, but not in a linear and direct way.
Does it mean we could actually see the cessation of, the kind of military exchanges and the conflict which is taking place on ground?
It could. It should. This war could end at any moment. Ukraine needs to declare neutrality. Ukraine needs to cede the territories that it's lost. It lost them in a war when it could have made peace without these loss of territories in the past. This is what happens in war. You go to war on a gamble, you lose. The war needs to end. Zelensky, for whatever reason, doesn't end a war that is in need of ending from the point of view of Ukraine's own sovereignty, security, and safety of its people. So why doesn't Zelensky end this war as he should have ended in April 2022, for example, when there was a draft agreement, or when Ukraine could have negotiated an end to the war by honoring the Minsk II agreement in 2015, or could have avoided the war altogether had there not been a U.S. coup in February 2014? Well, the answer is Zelensky represents or is the front person for an extremist nationalist regime that represents some interests in Western Ukraine, imposes its will on the rest of the country, and is causing massive disaster in Ukraine. So Russia will continue to advance. Some people say that if Zelensky made peace, he'd be killed by his own side, quite possible, or he'd be pushed out and have to run to exile. Nobody knows exactly why the irrationality of this destruction continues. But what I'm telling you is that the massive Western propaganda that this is an unprovoked war by Putin because he's an expansionist, militarist, imperialist is phony. And it's been obviously phony for years. This is a war that at its core was a war of U.S. expansion by pushing NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia, which every senior, responsible, honest analyst knew was extremely dangerous and which the Russians objected to for 30 years. The war can end if Trump would publicly say NATO enlargement is over. The war will end on that basis. Territorial adjustments will be made given the realities of the ethnic Russian population and the situation on the battlefield. The war could end today. Unfortunately, Trump is not smart enough, doesn't communicate with the American people properly, and is not brave enough to do what should be done.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that look, you will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HT videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.